The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, but inside was a storm. Friends, let me ask you right away. What is the wisest way to handle conflict when someone comes against you unfairly? Have you ever had to stand your ground with neighbors, or even an entire neighborhood? Your advice may help others here. The story begins with a man named James Carter, a quiet, dignified man in his early 60s. James had worked most of his life as an engineer before retiring. He loved gardening, woodworking, and above all, peace. He had bought a large parcel of land decades earlier, land he cherished, land his children had played on, and land he now hoped to pass on to his grandchildren. But on that Tuesday morning, peace was replaced with shock. When James opened the envelope, he froze. Inside was a notice from the Homeowners Association, a group of people who governed the neighborhood that had grown around James's property over the years. The letter was written in stern, bold words. Mr. Carter, you are in violation of multiple HOA rules, including unauthorized structures, non-standard fencing, and failure to maintain uniform landscaping. You are hereby fined $250,000. James set the letter down slowly. His brow furrowed, but he did not panic. He whispered aloud to himself, $250,000? For land I've owned before this neighborhood even existed? He looked out the window at his oak trees, towering like guardians over the property, and a heavy silence filled the room. James's wife, Margaret, walked in. What is it, James? She asked softly. He handed her the letter. She gasped. This can't be right. They can't do this to you. James nodded slowly. Or maybe they think they can. He felt the weight of history pressing against him. He remembered his father telling him, never let anyone strip you of what you've worked for. Stand with dignity. But this was more than dignity. This was war. And little did the HOA know. James Carter was not just a homeowner. He was the landowner. He held the original deed to the very ground beneath their houses. But what would he do next? Because that was the shocking part. James wasn't just fighting fines. He held power they didn't even realize yet. The days that followed brought no peace. Instead, more letters arrived, each stamped with the HOA's insignia, each more demanding than the last. Immediate payment required. Legal action pending. Failure to comply will result in property liens. James sat at his kitchen table, a folder slowly filling with each letter. Margaret brewed tea, shaking her head. They're trying to scare us, James. They don't know who they're dealing with. But it wasn't just letters. Soon, suspicious events began unfolding in the neighborhood. One evening, James noticed two HOA board members standing across the street, pointing at his fence and jotting notes. He stepped outside. Evening, gentlemen, he said calmly. They stiffened, startled. One, a tall man with neatly pressed slacks, replied curtly, Mr. Carter, we're simply documenting ongoing violations. James's eyes narrowed. Violations of whose rules? This is my land. The man avoided his gaze. You're within the HOA jurisdiction, sir. Everyone must comply. James let the silence hang heavy, then walked back inside. But he felt something stir inside him, an indignation, quiet but powerful. The neighborhood itself seemed divided. Some neighbors whispered words of support. Others avoided James altogether, unwilling to cross the HOA. At the community mailbox, one elderly woman leaned in and whispered, Mr. Carter, I know this isn't right. They push people around, but most folks are too afraid to speak. Each week, more fines stacked up. The HOA claimed his shed was too large. His garden didn't meet aesthetic standards. Even the color of his shutters was suddenly non-compliant. James began documenting everything, every letter, every conversation, every visit. He placed each neatly in a binder, page by page. One evening, as Margaret watched him organize, she asked, What are you planning, James? He closed the binder and looked at her with steady eyes. I'm letting them build their own case, because when the truth comes out, it won't just be about fines. The air felt heavy, charged with something bigger than the HOA could imagine, because James had evidence of his own, and soon, he would reveal a truth that would shake the entire neighborhood. James did not rush. That was never his way. He believed patience was strength, and wisdom came from waiting for the right moment. Each morning he rose early, walked his land, and thought carefully. The oak trees whispered in the wind, reminding him of endurance. He had seen storms come and go. This was just another storm. He pulled out his old leather-bound deed, yellowed with age, but still clear. It bore his name, his father's signature, and the official stamp of the county clerk. It was undeniable proof James Carter owned not just his house, but the entire stretch of land the HOA claimed to govern. The homes had been built later by developers who leased and sold parcels, but the HOA had overlooked one crucial detail: the land rights beneath were never transferred. James still held them. He met with a lawyer, a calm woman with sharp eyes. She studied the deed, then the stack of HOA letters. She leaned back and said, "Mr. Carter, this is extraordinary. They're trying to find the landlord of the entire neighborhood." James smiled faintly. "And they don't even realize it." The lawyer advised him to stay quiet for now. "Let them dig deeper. When they push harder, we'll respond with the truth." At dinner, James explained the plan to Margaret. "We'll let them believe they're in control, and when they take this to court, we'll show them who really owns the ground they stand on." Margaret reached for his hand. "This could get ugly, James." He nodded. "Yes, but sometimes you don't look for a fight. Sometimes it finds you, and when it does, you fight it with truth." He also thought of his children and grandchildren. What lesson would this battle teach them? Would they learn to fear authority or to stand tall when wronged? The night before the confrontation, James sat quietly in his study. He whispered his father's words once more. "Never let anyone strip you of what you've worked for." And then he closed the deed, tucked it into his briefcase, and prepared. Because the next day, the HOA would come to enforce their $250,000 fine, and James would be ready to show them a truth that would turn their world upside down. The meeting hall was filled with tension. The HOA board sat at a long table, papers stacked high. Neighbors sat in rows of folding chairs, murmuring quietly. At the center, under the fluorescent lights, stood James Carter. The HOA president, a stern woman named Linda, began. "Mr. Carter, after repeated violations and failure to comply, the board has voted unanimously. You now owe $250,000 in fines. Failure to pay will result in liens against your property." Gasps rippled through the room. James remained calm. He placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid out the leather-bound deed. He laid it gently in front of Linda. "Madam President," he said evenly, "before you proceed further, I suggest you read this." She frowned, adjusting her glasses. The room grew silent. She flipped the pages, her face tightening with each line. This can't be right." James's voice carried across the hall. "It is right. This is the original deed to this land. I bought it long before a single home was built here. Legally, I am the landowner, which means technically every house in this neighborhood, including yours, rests on land I own." Whispers erupted. A man in the back exclaimed, "Is that true?" The lawyer at James's side stood. "It is true. The HOA has been fining Mr. Carter as if he were subject to their rules. But in fact, the HOA itself exists on land that belongs to him." Linda's face flushed red. This must be a mistake." "Our bylaws," James interrupted, calm but firm. "Your bylaws stop at my property line, and my property line includes your entire neighborhood." The silence was deafening. Neighbors turned, stunned. Some looked relieved. Others looked angry at the board. A frail man in the second row stood slowly and said, "So all these fines, all the threats, they had no authority?" James nodded once. The room erupted into arguments. HOA board members scrambled, whispering to each other. Neighbors shouted questions. And through it all, James remained still, dignified, unshaken. Finally, Linda slammed her gavel, but her voice shook as she said, "This meeting is adjourned." But the truth could not be adjourned, because in that moment the entire neighborhood realized the power had shifted, and the HOA's reign of control was crumbling before their eyes. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The HOA backed down quickly. Their lawyer confirmed what James had proven: the fines were invalid. The board, once so forceful, became quiet. Some even resigned. Others avoided James entirely, unwilling to face the humiliation. But something else happened too. Neighbors began approaching James with newfound respect. At the mailbox, the same elderly woman smiled warmly. "Mr. Carter, you saved us all from their bullying. Thank you." James shook his head. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right." Even those who had once avoided him now sought his wisdom. One man admitted, "I never realized you owned the land. We were wrong to doubt you." For James, the victory wasn't just about the $250,000 fine. It was about dignity. It was about standing firm when others tried to intimidate him. He reflected quietly one evening, walking beneath his oak trees. He thought of his father's words. He thought of his grandchildren, and he realized the true lesson. When you stand in truth, no matter how powerful others may seem, their power crumbles against it. So friends, I ask you again, what is the wisest way to face unfair conflict? Have you ever had to stand firm against pressure from others? Your wisdom, your advice, could guide someone else walking through their own storm. James Carter's story reminds us, sometimes patience is stronger than anger. Calm is stronger than force, and truth is stronger than any fine. If this story moved you, or if you found a lesson in it, I ask one simple thing. Tap. Like, leave your advice in the comments, and subscribe for more HOA Karen stories, because the next story may be just as shocking, and just as full of lessons we all need to remember.